This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on significance of internationalization of rupee. The participants are Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, economic analyst, and Lalima Anija Dang, anchor.
Yesterday, the Reserve Bank of India appointed a working group on various recommended measures, including inclusion of the rupee in the Special Drawing Rights (SDR) basket and recalibration of the Foreign Portfolio Investor (FPI) regime to accelerate the pace of internalization of the rupee. The recommendations by an interdepartmental group, IDG, headed by RBI Executive Director Radha Shyam Ratho, were placed on the RBI website. The efforts were well in place since last year when the RBI put in place a mechanism to settle international trade in rupees in order to promote growth of global trade, emphasizing export from India. Well, more on this, and for that we have with us financial expert Shubhamoy Chatterjee. Shubhamoy, welcome to All India Radio, or Akashvani as we now call it.
Thank you.
Well, has the rupee got the potential to become an international currency?
So the way it happens is that in any country, the medium of exchange is that country's currency, which means that in India we use the rupee, in Bangladesh they use taka, in UK they'll use the British pound, in USA they'll be using the US dollar, and so on and so on. In UAE they'll use the dirham. Now what happens is that these currencies are acceptable to the people of that country because it is issued by their central bank. That is the reason why these currencies are acceptable. However, some currencies become more attractive even beyond the borders of those countries because of the weight or the importance of that economy. So, for instance, since the USA is the preeminently largest economy in the world, the US dollar is therefore used by lots of people who are not only US citizens but people across the world to trade among themselves. Similarly, because of the colonial hangover, the British pound is an acceptable currency. And in the middle of the 20th century, we have the emergence of the euro, which is a consortium of the currencies of countries like France, Germany, and so on. Now, these currencies, or the Japanese yen, as I said, they are significant primarily because of the fact their economies are big. So people trade with these countries, and because they trade with those countries, people are willing to therefore accept their currencies as a medium of payment. What's happening with India? India is now already the 5th largest economy of the world. It's also on way to become the 3rd largest economy. That means what? That there are more people across the world who are now trading with India. They could continue to do it in US dollars or in British pounds or in Japanese yen. But naturally, India would be interested that the medium of trade should be the Indian rupee. Now, remember, this is not something which is written in law anywhere, but it is simply, as we say, the heft of a particular country's economy, which determines whether a currency is internationalized, whether the currency is acceptable to the global traders. Over the past few years, the RBI has noticed, the central government finance ministry has noticed that the interest among people outside to deal with Indian currency is rising. However, for reasons which we shall not go into here, for any countries typically keep some restrictions on how a currency is used. So, interest level has risen. We are also seeing the rise of the Indian economy very fast.
Yes.
So, together that makes for a very potent combination. The thing that needs to be done is for the country's currency controller, which is the Reserve Bank of India, to bring in rules to make it easier for somebody from abroad to trade with India in Indian rupees. What you've just now listed out are basically series of those measures. They've been done earlier also, as you also pointed out. And essentially, in a basket, what they do is they create a much more easier framework for use of Indian rupee when there's a trade between, say, an Indian company and a company abroad to do the transactions in Indian rupee. That's, in short, what has happened.
All right. When the rupee logo was launched, Indians were very happy. When we started trading with 18 countries in the Indian rupee, we became happier. And those include some advanced countries as well, like Germany. Apart from Kenya, we have Sri Lanka, Singapore, United Kingdom, and so on. Now, that the rupee has been so-called internationalized. We should have seen this coming. And how does it affect the exporters, the importers? Shivamma, when we go abroad, we see that many of our stores are full of products from India, and we have given GI certification to so many products, which makes them very special abroad. We see Itra, we see cotton clothes being exported from India, we see handicraft items particularly. The Western world has practically no handicrafts existing. How does that benefit the exporters from our country?
So first of all, currencies, as I said, each country's currency also is essentially what? Is a reflection of that country's GDP. So if there is inflation in the country, that inflation also gets baked into that currency. Now, this is an interesting phenomena because then what it means is if I am trading in US dollar to pay for an Indian product, then I am paying not only in the currency of USA, I am also taking account of the rate of inflation in that country. So this trading in another country's currency, if I am therefore using that currency to buy some Indian products for import into India, I import an inflation into India. For instance, when we buy oil from abroad, that what happens is, since the transaction happens mostly in US dollars, the rate of inflation abroad gets transmitted into India. Like for instance, during the COVID times, India was actually going through a deflationary period. But while India was going through a deflationary period, the inflation rate is rising in many of these international countries. So that inflation was actually coming in. So it was a peculiar situation that the oil that we were buying should actually have been cheaper, considering what India's needs. We were in a deflationary situation. But India was not able to get it at a cheaper rate because India was buying in US dollars. Now, internationalization of rupee, if we assume that it will be used to pay for payment of oil, then it will help us that our rate of inflation will also be the rate at which we will be importing a barrel of oil into India. Leaving out the technicalities, what it basically means is that any country which becomes more powerful gets a chance to push the trade in its own currency. And that is where India is also seeing the currency movements happening.
Does this decision become more significant, Shubhammoy, in the light of the economic sanctions imposed by the US on Russia for invading Ukraine and the growing clamor for finding an alternative to the US dollar for international transactions? Of course, US dollar now stands threatened, if I may say so.
Well, I wouldn't say that the US dollar is going to be off its perch very soon because, if you look at the size of the world trade, of that about 70% gets traded in US dollar. That's a huge amount. The important thing is that to the extent that India is now trading more robustly with the rest of the world, and India needs the terms of trade to be not only be beneficial, but also advantageous for itself, therefore would be interested and can insist in lots of cases that the currency of transaction should be rupee. And when it does happen, one of the things that is necessary in that case is for the Reserve Bank of India to offer conditions, rules and regulations which are comfortable for the counterparty, that is the party from abroad, for them also to trade in rupee. And that is what, the measures that you announced right at the beginning, also the measures that are already there, they together form a sort of a set of measures which allows the rupee to be traded easily across borders.
When we say that among the measures adopted by RBI is the inclusion of the rupee in the Special Drawing Rights Basket, SDR, for listeners' benefit, how would you explain the concept of special drawing rights and its significance in the global financial system?
Yeah, it's something like this. The International Monetary Fund, is sometimes called upon to help developing countries in distress. Now, we have examples on our border. Already this year, early in January, Bangladesh has taken help from IMF. Sri Lanka last year has got a bailout package from IMF. Pakistan is just about to get it. But all of these countries are in distress. Nepal needs IMF support. Now when IMF gives the support, IMF does not give the support in terms of that country's currency. Why? Because if it gives so, that country in any case has its own reserves of currency. So getting whatever additional amount of money denominated in that country's currency doesn't really help that country. So what the IMF does is it gives the country what is called a purchasing power, additional purchasing power. And to make it relevant, how is that purchasing power shown? It is shown in terms of these strong international currencies. So the US dollar, the British pound, the euro, the yen, these are the currencies that are used. So it's basically a basket of those currencies is offered into these countries so that when they want to buy something, they don't have to convert their currency into the relevant international currencies, but they have a ready-made supply which can then be used to buy those. I mean, why this is significant for India is that IMF is saying that, okay, fine, and India is also saying that we should be putting Indian rupee also in that basket. Why is that necessary and why is that significant? Because it means that there's lots of countries when they will want to buy products from abroad, they will want to buy it from India. So it makes sense for them that instead of having to buy, say, use Japanese yen, they would be much more comfortable if they can buy it in Indian rupee. So, and again, the same point comes in that because the Indian products are now so very widely disseminated across the world, our engineering, our chemicals, our textiles, pharma. So all of these products make, when they want to buy, they would need the currency. So therefore having within the IMF package a sum which is from Indian in rupee also helps them because that's necessary for them. There are lots of countries which need to buy Indian products. And therefore it's first of all, it's significant because IMF thinks that yes, the Indian currency is or rather should be part of that package of the special drawing rights which countries would get as part of their support measures to be able to help them out of the distress. So it's typically what you would call a very big vote of confidence in the Indian rupee and the currency.
Well, that sounds good for our economy. And of course, we've been seeing that the Sensex has been crossing almost 65,000 it has reached. That also gives us the confidence our economy is sound and based on very, very safe and strong fundamentals. How would you say that the recalibration of the foreign portfolio investor regime will contribute to the internationalization of the rupee?
The foreign portfolio is the same thing that happens that when a foreign investor comes to invest in the Indian stock market, that person needs to be able to put the money into India, invest in any particular Indian company, and then take that money out, which is the profit. From RBI, there are enough facilities and relaxations to do so. But as the facilities and relaxations have been built in, the demand is rising because as you see that in the year 2023, the amount of money that is coming in from FPIs, with the foreign portfolio investors, is rising very sharp. Now, if that happens, obviously there will be more and more reasons and there will be more types of demand to get the relaxations from RBI. And that is what the Reserve Bank has done. And these are all welcome measures. And in the coming days and months, you'll get to hear more of these sort of steps.
Would that mean that we will have greater foreign reserves?
Whenever the foreign portfolio investor, anybody who buys an Indian product, buys in reserves of different countries. But typically, when we are talking about internationalization of rupee, we would be expecting that more of the transactions would be happening in rupee, which means that you need less of the foreign exchange reserves. You actually don't need to hold so much. Holding of reserves also has a cost. So the internationalization of rupee helps us to take off the pressure from our foreign exchange reserves substantially.
Right. Shubhamoy, does internationalization of the rupee, how does it affect the average Indian citizens, particularly in terms of their savings and purchasing power?
As I said, the stronger the currency is, that is a demonstration of how well that country's economy is running. So, anytime that a person sees that the currency is more acceptable abroad, being used in more regions, in more spaces, in more places, then that automatically should tell the Indian that his or her savings or investments within India are therefore getting in better shape because she or he has more access to purchasing power because that purchasing power is coming in Indian rupee. So therefore the person is able to buy more from within all over the places. So that's definitely something which would give a boost or a fillip to the Indian economy.
Right. And finally, are there any risks or potential challenges associated with the internationalization of the rupee that we should be looking to counter?
It's always a good idea to be more integrated with the world economy because that makes each country look after its own affairs much more closely. So people have developed more sense of responsibility. The financial markets, the financial institutions also are worked on much more solid principles. Already they are very well being run on very well-grounded principles, and we will expect more of those sort of things to happen in India.
Right. Thank you, Shubhamoy, for coming to Akashvani and giving us your views on the internationalization of the Indian rupee. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on significance of internationalization of rupee. The participants were Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, economic analyst, and Lalima Aneja Dang, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 928-909-4044.